Hello, I'm Bodo, and you can find me playing New World at GGBodoTV on YouTube and Twitch. I'll be showing you 4 different tier lists, some for PvP and PvE content. These tier lists will be focusing on the early to mid game of New World, so you can know the best weapon to begin your journey. I'll be making a late game tier list in a different video, but those tier lists are based on a lot of different factors like stack break points and very lucky gear drops. The reason I've made 4 different tier lists is because of the variety of content and situations in New World, like 1v1s, 5v5s, 50 vs 50s, and dungeons, which are the exact 4 I'll be going over. The details of each tier shows you the breakdown I'm using to gauge all weapons in each list. Based on the strategy of each tier list will determine the overall placement of each weapon. I'll be explaining the ranking of each weapon on all 4 lists because their strengths and weaknesses change based on the situation they're in. Alright, so let's start going over the tier lists. Now before we even start, these tier lists are set up for the first 80% of the game. So like early, mid to mid late. There's some weapons that will change on the tier list depending on when you hit end game. I will mention those weapons, I'll let you know, but I want to go through this pretty quick. S tier, Life Staff, Fire Staff. Both of these weapons scale from mid to late game very strong. Early game, it needs some mastery levels to really get it moving, but in terms of 1v1s, they're very good weapon. Life Staff, you can heal yourself even if you're doing a hybrid build. Fire Staff, you hit like a truck. Even at late game, end game, you have like the potential to basically one-shot someone at late game. A tier, we got Ice Gauntlet, Great Axe, Bow, Rapier. Now, out of the A tier, Ice Gauntlet, essentially, if it did no damage, it would still be an A tier in 1v1s. At end game, if it did no damage, it would still be an A tier. The reason why? The versatility, the CC that you get for the Ice Gauntlet is unparalleled. This thing basically counters melee. The nice thing about the Ice Gauntlet too is that you could use it in any build. Even if you're doing a full strength build like a Great Axe Ice Gauntlet, you can pull it off. It works. So that's why look out for this in end game as well. In terms of Great Axe, the bow, they're kind of end game scaling. It's a bit wishy-washy. There's other weapons that are better than them at end game, but in terms of 1v1s, it's very strong and powerful. Lots of versatility. For the Great Axe in particular, high base damage. The animations are a little slow, but with the the gap closers, the passive healing that you get, the 2 CCs, one being an 8-meter pull and the other one being just I think it's roughly 4-meter sphere gravity well. It's just very good at 1v1s. It's going to be very good in 50v50s. It's just a weapon that scales and gets more value basically the bigger the fights get. But in 1v1s it's still very good. End game, late game, like I said, I think there's some other weapons that are going to give it a run for its money. In terms of the bow, end game, late game, the Fire Staff and the musket's just going to outclass it. For the first 80% of the game, it's very good in 1v1s, but once you get to the late game, it's going to get outclassed. Rapier, if it did no damage, it'd still be A tier because the movement and the versatility of using iframes, Rapier is just very good. With the damage that it has, you want to use it as like a finisher, or do you want to use it to be like kiting and not take any damage, abuse the iframes to dodge abilities and attacks, and to finish someone off? But it's more well paired with like a ranged weapon. So even because it scales off dexterity and intelligence, if you use Fire Staff, musket, or bow with the Rapier, essentially when you use the Rapier, really just to reposition, just to abuse the range. But Rapier, in saying that, it's very good. In terms of late game scalability, if it did no damage, it would still be an A tier, just off the mechanics of positioning alone. B tier, musket, hatchet. Now these 2 weapons, there's some, I got some gripes with them. These probably should be a little bit higher on the tier list, but specifically for 1v1s, musket, when you get to late game, it becomes a monster. Becomes a crit monster. Hatchet, when you get sorry, my voice is going. Hatchet, when you get to late game, it's still a monster. It's still the all-in king, but people can play around it. That's also why it's in B tier. In 1v1s, people can play around your berserk. Musket, you have to reload. So even though at end game it's going to be a crit monster, it's going to be really powerful, you still have to reload. You still have to stop. You still have to slow down and all this stuff. which in 1v1s it's pretty bad. You know, 1v1s, you want to have movement, you want to have momentum. If you lose your momentum because you have to reload or prime an ability, people are going to abuse it. They're not just going to wait for you. That's why it's in B tier. Hatchet as well. People will abuse your abilities, even though late game it's arguably the all-in king. Even at mid game to early game, it's still the all-in king. You want to get to at least mastery level 11 for you to get to that though. Musket early game, it's still very good, but it's kind of like a pea shooter. Once you get to like level 45, you get 300 dexterity at that point. That's when you can really start abusing it. But yeah, they're both in B tier. C tier, spear, sword, and shield. Spear, kind of like... Spear's in a weird way. Spear's kind of like the musket and the hatchet, where it has to be used in a particular way. Now, spear in 1v1s, it probably goes from a C tier to an A tier with specific build. That's why I put it at average, because you do need a certain amount of skill, you do need a specific build, and use it in a specific way. Chasing people with the spear to CC them is bad. It's terrible. Having people coming to you and you CC them that way, so you know they're always coming at you, it's always a linear path, that's where it shines. But because it's that, it's lower on the C tier, because I know how to counter a spear. I know how to do it. It's very easy. You just go in and quickly back out, and they'll waste vault kick. Go in, quickly come back out. They'll waste sweep. There's other abilities where you can just hammer through them and just win on the trades before they can get off their CC, because it's all close quarters CC. So spear, you can play around it in 1v1s. In terms of scalability, weapon skills, just because of the factor that it's one of the best CCs in the game. If you try to put the pressure on the spear, it will CC you and has multiple CCs, and it can keep you CC stunned versus very good users for a total of 8 seconds if they know what they're doing. Now, in saying that, late game, it's kind of hard to judge where it's going to be. There isn't a specific build that makes it super broken. It's how the person uses it. That's why it's in C tier. At end game, I can't confidently say it's going to be a broken top end weapon, specifically in PvP. And PVE, that's a different story, but we'll get to that tier list later. Sword and shield. Sword and shield is very strong. In terms of 1v1s though, it's going to get outpaced in damage, unfortunately. Even with all its defensive abilities, it's still going to get outpaced in damage. The one thing that's really nice about sword shield is that you can go god mode, but when you start attacking things, it doesn't match the hit. And it's either you go full god mode with the sword and shield, or you go full damage. And when you go full damage, it's just not enough. Even though it has 175 weapon base ability, damage ability, it's just not enough in 1v1s. It's just not bringing enough. In larger group fights, it becomes super strong. End game scalability, this weapon scales very well. It is blocking, it is damage mitigation, so the more resistance you get with the better gear, the better perks that you get, because there's specific perks that turns like the sword and shield into Lightning McQueen. There's a lot of cool things with the sword and shield at late game. In terms of mid game to mid-late to late game, sword and shield really picks up, especially when you get more mastery points into it and better resistances. But in terms of 1v1s, even at late game, I think it's going to have a hard time. D. Now, Warhammer's at D for 1v1s, and that's probably going to be the only weapon that ever hits D. It's below average. You need a very specific build, skill, and matchup. In 1v1s, if someone's wearing full heavy armor, even if they're running sword and shield, and you have the Warhammer, you counter them. You have a lot of armor penetration. You hit hard. Your abilities are very slow, but you counter sword and shield. But in saying that, it's a very specific situation. In terms of late game scalability, okay, keep this on the down low. Don't tell anybody else. If you see, if you're watching this video right now, don't tell other people this. But the Warhammer late game, end game build, there is a perk that turns the Warhammer into the Babe Ruth. That's right. You want to make those troll videos? You want to make some really funny meme troll videos? The Warhammer's got a baby. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. In terms of the end game, late game, it's arguably the strongest weapon in the freaking game. If it gets nerfed, I'm not going to say what it is, but if it gets nerfed, then it'll become the worst weapon in the game. But at this point, it's my favorite weapon at end game. I can tell you that right now. So the Babe Ruth, that's what I'm calling it. The Warhammer is the Babe Ruth build at end game. I'm not going to say any more about it. It goes from D tier to like SS++ tier. I love it. I love it so much. And people that know what I'm talking about, like, ugh, I can't wait to start trolling people. But anyway, that's the 1v1s. So let's move on to the next tier. So let's go over the 5v5s. Now, the 5v5 list is structured around competitive 5v5s. So, you know, dueling group versus group. Right now, that function's a little bit broken in the game, but that's pretty much what we're going around. Now, for S tier, we have Life Staff, we have Fire Staff. A tier, Ice Gauntlet, Great Axe, Hatchet, Rapier. B tier, Sword and Shield, Musket, Warhammer. C tier, Spear and Bow. Nothing's really in D tier. Everything can be used and utilized. Some things are lower than others. Some things are higher than others based upon versatility. What did they bring to the fight? For example, we all know the best range weapon is going to be Fire Staff. We all know the two best melee weapons you can bring is really the Great Axe and the Hatchet for just raw damage, stick potential, and the versatility. We know if you're a range user, let's say you're using a Fire Staff, if you bring a Rapier with you, you're going to be super mobile. Ice Gauntlet, if you want to be Fire Staff and you want to be like the dude that drops the CC and makes it so that all the melee users are having a bad time and they're crying, you know, you bring in the Ice Gauntlet, stuff like that. Sword and Shield, Musket, Warhammer, still very good. You want to utilize them. You definitely want to have at least one dude with a Sword and Shield, and maybe he has the Warhammer as well. It's just like you gotta use it in a specific way. That's why it's lower on the tier list. Musket, you know, you got that pesky little reload. It kind of brings it down a bit, but we all know at end game the thing will kind of delete people, kind of like the Fire Staff. Spear Bow, the reason why it's a little bit lower. You know, Spear, you could probably get your CC off a lot better in this situation, even though they're not coming towards you. They're going to be fighting your teammates and stuff like that. Just that the Warhammer just does a better job. Just better job with its AoE CC. Bow's still very good. I think it should be higher on the list, but the reason why I put it down like below is because like the Fire Staff is the obvious choice. The Musket is the second obvious choice because it's hit scan. And the Bow, depending on how the fight goes, if they're huddled up, it's no problem. People are running around crazy, dodging, and trying to play the distance game with like guys in the back line. You're gonna get focused. They'll be like, oh, just shoot the Bow guy. He can't shoot us. You know, stuff like that. Like that's why I have the Bow a little bit lower. And that's pretty much it for the 5v5s. Now, keep in mind this is like competitive 5v5s, and the lowest ranking I have is basically average. Nothing's really below average. Depends how you have your strategy and your team structured. You can use a variety of different strats, really. I feel like any weapon can be viable. I don't want to say that, you know, this weapon is like absolute crap, because I believe in the competitive format. As long as you have team cohesion and you're working off of each other, that's your force multiplier, not the weapon you're really bringing. So that's all I have to really say about the 5v5. We'll move on to the next tier. All right, so let's get on to the 50 versus 50. S tier, Life Staff, Fire Staff, AoE heals, AoE damage mixed with high burst single target damage. That's why these two weapons are S tier on every list essentially. A tier, Ice Gauntlet, Great Axe, Musket, and Sword and Shield. Now the one thing you're gonna notice that Musket and Sword and Shield has risen in the 50 versus 50. Why is that? Well, you have to take first of all how the war system works. Now this is tier list specifically for the war system. Sword and Shield blocking, lots of damage reduction, allows you to stay on the point as long as possible. You can still attack, you can still be a nuisance, you can do some damage, but it's going to give that durability. And there's a lot of abilities that help your allies when you're blocking and taking attacks too. So it's not just good for you to have Sword and Shields on the point, but it's good for everybody else. No, I wouldn't litter it with like everybody using sword and shield, but you want a good amount of them. Musket, you know, you get a dedicated musket team. You start taking out the guys on the siege weapons, whether you're attacking or defending. That's why musket's an A tier. Ice Scotland, Great Axe, you already know why they're up here. They're just so good. Good utility, good versatility. Great Axe, great damage. You really do need those gravity wells. The Reap, Ice Gauntlet. You want to like just CC the crap out of the doorways and on points, prevent people from like really pushing in on your boys. You want to like use it as like you're the back line, but you're throwing out your CC to make sure that people are funneling into your team and not like hoarding into your team. B tier, we have Warhammer Hatchet. The reason why is because in these large fights, the Warhammer's still good. You're going to get a lot of CC off, especially in the points, especially in doorways. But that's pretty much it until you get this thing broken at endgame and you start memeing on people. You know, you go the whole Babe Ruth build and you see like, okay, I'm not going to comment on it. Let's put it that way. I just don't want them to fix it. But Warhammer pretty much becomes like SS plus 7, 7, 39, 69, 420 tier at endgame. Hatchet, you can still use it. It's still versatile. You can use it as a positioning mechanic, CC breaker, a lot of things. Still useful. It's just that the other stuff above is just better for the teamwork coordination. C tier, bow, spear, rapier. You can still use it. You can still use the rapier for the movement. You can still use the spear for the AoE. CC, I'm not thinking right now. You can use it for full damage and just do a crit build. You know, it's still good. It's just that the other stuff above it are better for what you're trying to do. Bow, the reason why it's down here is just that you're going to get outranged. It's just, you're going to get outranged. Yes, you can kite, but when you have like the musket users, when you have the fire staff users, musket users are going to outrange you. Fire staff users are going to out DPS you. That's why it's in C tier. But you can use pretty much everything because in this format, it's still competitive. It's still teamwork, cohesion, coordination will trump a lot of stuff. Yes, you want to stack life staffs. Yes, you want to have a certain amount of sword and shield so you get the damage mitigation and the survivability on like specific points. Yes, you want a musket team. Yes, you want all this other stuff, but you can really use any weapon in combination you really want to. So saying that, that's pretty much how the 50-50 war is looking. Everything's viable. It's just that some things are just more useful than others. Now, dungeons. We're talking about open and closed dungeons. One thing I want to state before I get into this tier list. You can run anything in dungeons. As long as you have a good group, you have a good healer, you got good DPS, you can run anything. You can make troll builds, do whatever. But and for the purpose of like clear speed and efficiency, this is kind of what this tier list for the dungeons is set up to be. Now, S tier, we have life staff and fire staff. Best healing, best range damage. A tier, we have sword shield, best tank weapon to use. Great axe, bow, spear, ice gauntlet, hatchet, rapier. A lot of these things you can use for pure damage for like melee DPS. A lot of these things you can use for range DPS. Ice gauntlet for the pure utility out of it, for the help to control trash mobs or like the ads and bosses. Rapier for movement and damage. Actually, rapier does a lot of damage in PVE just because you can get behind people and just like, you know, just hit them, just hit the boss in his butt. Let your tank just take all the splash AoEs and the wedge damage, and you just hit them in the butt. You just go, oh yeah, I'm just free all day. Same with the spear. You just stand behind them, hit them in the butt. You just do damage free for all day. And they have some really good mechanics, bleed mechanics. They get some extra damage off their bleeds. You know, no one's dodging crazy. They're just, the tank's holding them in place. That's why they're above. That's why they're really good. That's why you can kind of use everything, because as long as you have a good tank and a good healer, damage is just the speed at which you clear the dungeon. B tier musket. The only reason I put the musket down here is because, you know, versus the bow and the fire staff, those two can kite way more effectively than the musket. Obviously, the bow is the king of kiting and range DPS, but the musket, you got to reload constantly, and if there's like boss ads on you, it can be a pain in the butts. So yeah, that's why. C tier Warhammer. Warhammer, it's pretty good. It's good in dungeons. You can use it if you want to. It's in C tier. It's not in D tier. It's average. It's just that there's just better things. There's better weapons that do its job better and more effectively. That's the only reason why Warhammer's in C tier. In terms of like the end game, late game, like I said about the Babe Ruth build, I would still argue that the Warhammer's still in C tier. It's good. You could use it, but there's just things that are just better. But like I said before, you can use whatever you want. Really, you just need a good healer and a good tank. And like I said, DPS is just essentially how fast you're going to clear the dungeon. So take what it is, but this tier list is a little bit more slack. It's a little bit more slack. You can screw around and test with a bunch of things. But that's it for the dungeons. So thank you for watching my video on the tier list. I know it's a longer video than what I usually put out, but the reason why I wanted all the different tier lists together is so that you could see the weapons kind of changing in value, changing in power based upon the situation. And really, like, you can use any weapon in the game. In terms of like the top meta builds, that's only really going to apply to like hardcore competitive PvP and like 1v1 situations or like the wars and stuff like that. But even then, it's more about working as a team and strategy and cohesiveness than it is about the particular build or the weapons. Yes, you're going to get a lot of power out of certain weapons, but you can still have fun and test things out and do whatever you really want. Do what you think is fun. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Once again, subscribe to my YouTube, leave a comment on future videos or what you'd like to see from me, or if you saw something in this video or like, hey, the spear shouldn't be down that low, that's like S tier. You know, just let me know. Like if you can, if you want to watch me on Twitch, it's GGBoto TV, just like the YouTube channel, you'll find me easily. I'm recently going to play like a little bit of variety games, like maybe some Darkest Dungeon, you know, some other games, some small things leading up to New World being released, because, well, obviously we're gonna wait a lot longer than we suspected. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and have a nice day.